The US remains the world's most capable military power. Its armed forces are well trained. They have acquired an important wealth of experience on the battlefields in the Middle East, and as such, they have got an immense exposure to modern technologies, such as precision ammunition and drones, with the relative doctrines involved. United States field a big army, with some elite units which rank among the very best trained in the world, advanced equipment and, as already stated, a considerable operative experience. Nonetheless, US Army is comparable with other great powers' armies, and though superior, doesn't enjoy that superiority like with the rest of its forces. On the contrary, US Air Force is by far the most advanced and numerous in the world, and the US Navy is the queen of the seas and enjoy a vast superiority compared with any other navy. US armed forces are absolutely the most technological advanced and best equipped in the world, and could hardly be different. Just take a look at the defense budget for the fiscal year 2019. With a GDP estimated to have reached 20,000 billions in 2018, it was 19,400 billions in 2017, a 686 billions defense budget has been proposed. The base budget is set for 617 billions and the Overseas Contingency Operations Fund is set for 69 billions. Now, compare it to the allocated Chinese and Russian 2018 budgets for the defense. The following figures are just speculation, but more than enough to underline the differences between them and the US defense budget. 250 billions for China, rapidly rising yet 2.7 times less than US one, while Russia decreased its spending for 2018 and 2019 back to something close to 50 billions, more than 10 times less than the US defense budget. Yeah, even though you will read on the news about the increasing Russian threat, Russia feels secure enough to reduce its defense spending, and certainly its economy couldn't allow to keep overspending. Nonetheless, China's rapid economic and military growth and Russia's renewed ambition pose a new challenge. From a bipolar world during the Cold War through the United States' absolute domination in the last 30 years into what has been defined a multipolar world in the last couple of years. While Russian armed forces are focused on advanced defensive capabilities, China has planned to increase its force projection capabilities, and this put the latter on a collision course with the United States. The purpose of this video is pretty clear: to explain why US belong to a different and superior tier, and why this superiority can be at the same time fragile and unsecure in the face of the new technologies and doctrines being considered worldwide. The future is highly uncertain, and great powers have not fought each other for over 70 years. Decades of having overwhelming military capabilities and obtaining easy tactical victories over weak adversaries have given the United States an inflated opinion of how good its military is. Senior officials have repeatedly made claims that the US military is not just the best in the world, but the best the world has ever known. US have fought against regional powers and non-statal actors, thus creating this unjustifiable hubris. A potential war against China or Russia won't be like anything fought in the last decades. Such overconfidence might lead to a downfall. Nevertheless, the situation remains substantially the same. The US military, especially the air and naval forces, maintain an unparalleled supremacy, and for now only asymmetric capabilities and new technologies and doctrines can undermine this supremacy. About military satellites, there is a lot to say, and we will cover this topic in the future. US have at their disposal the world's largest satellite network, used for many tasks, from the classic navigation and communication ones to satellite connections with weapon systems to engage targets with precision munitions. For now, it is enough to say that there is an arms race, especially with China, and lately US felt necessary to send in orbit new top-secret satellites, Some speculations say that this is due to the need to increase missile launch detection capabilities and communication satellites redundancy. Most of you know how much US forces rely on satellites, and these faces a great threat because of the new coming anti-satellites technologies, mostly powerful and advanced jamming and anti-satellites missiles. China is investing in both satellites and anti-satellites technologies, and this proves its commitment. Both of them are creating space forces, a nucleus of specialists to deal with military threats in the space domain. The US Army has adopted since 2013 as its base unit the brigade instead of the division. This is to enhance flexibility with the purpose to make every brigade of the same type exactly the same, thus allowing for a modular division to be created on the go. There are three common types of brigades: infantry, striker, and armored brigade combat team. The United States is the country with the highest vehicle-to-soldier ratio, and this has completely reverted the axiom that made the light infantry divisions those with the lowest mobility during the Second World War. As such, the infantry brigade combat team in the US is nowadays the most mobile of the three, capable of air assault operations and, when deployed, maneuvers with Humvee, L-ATVs and other light tactical vehicles like a light motorized infantry unit. The Striker Brigade Combat Team is a motorized infantry force based on the Striker family of armored fighting vehicles, and it's something in the middle between the high mobility of the Infantry Brigade and the Armored Brigade. The Striker Brigade has a considerable firepower, while still being able to be air transported by a C-130's Hercules fleet. The Armored Brigade Combat Team is the heaviest of the three, each of whom complemented as it is by over 90 M1 Abrams and 90 M2 Bradleys and other vehicles in a supporting role. You may have noticed its heavy reliance on light tactical vehicles and MRAPs. The first are necessary for a country with the best logistic capabilities in the world. The latter are just the answer to the threat posed by the modern improvised explosive devices, especially if you consider that they are responsible for over 60% of the deaths in the Iraq campaign. Honestly, after having seen Russian capabilities regarding how to deliver nuclear warheads, I think none of you could be impressioned by US nuclear capabilities. One can wonder why the most powerful armed forces in the world lag behind into such a strategically important capability. We think the answer lies on the fact that US needs to heavily invest on day-to-day operation capabilities, considering its commitment in many theaters worldwide. While nuclear capabilities are definitely something to rely on just in case one day the Armageddon arrives, or if you want to sit down at the diplomacy table with something more than your peer competitor. This, anyway, well shows how difficult it is even for the most powerful and richest country to just be on top of everything. In fact, US has chosen to invest in selected capabilities just like everyone else, while still having better overall capabilities. US armed forces rely on old ballistic missiles and is recently investing in standoff cruise missiles. Indeed, long-range standoff weapons are one of the weapons in which to rely on for the moment being, in case of a confrontation against either Russia or China, in consideration of the advanced area denial capabilities possessed by the air defense systems of these two countries. It is easy to understand how important it is to invest in this sector for the US. Strongly related to this is US need to invest more on the development of reliable hypersonic vehicles for the same purpose, overcoming enemy air defense systems. The US ballistic missile defense multi-layered system is one of the most advanced and efficient in the world. It is absurdly expensive, but this can reliably intercept only a bunch of ballistic missiles. Both saturation attacks or nuclear-armed hypersonic gliders can easily penetrate these defenses. And we underline, the United States have some of the very best ballistic defenses in the world. We felt like making this clear because it's currently the single general most debated point among US military analysts. Should the US invest on day-to-day operation capabilities like more equipment, more personnel, replenish ammunitions, improve readiness, or toward being competitive against peer competitors like Russia or China's militaries? research and development investments, therefore new technologies and doctrines, strategic deterrence, long-range interceptors, and so on. The defense budget for the fiscal year 2019 has tried to address both the requirements. Today, the US Navy is by far the most powerful of the globe, a condition that is the result of the victory over the Japanese in the Second World War, the decline experienced by the British Navy during the 20th century, and the collapse of the Soviet one at the end of the Cold War. The centerpiece of America's naval might are the 11 battle groups focused on nuclear-powered super aircraft carriers that, together with their escort units, cruisers, destroyers, frigates, and attack submarines, concentrate in themselves an unparalleled war potential, designed to destroy enemy forces above, on, or under the sea, and conduct precision attacks against land targets. These aircraft carriers are the biggest warships ever built, and they are capable of operating for 20 years without refueling. There is, however, quite a heated debate concerning US heavy reliance on aircraft carriers. This is not new, but we think that the recent developments related to missile technology and stealth technology, or those related to noise reduction applied to submarines, can place this debate at the center among the most important in the discussion regarding the redefinition of strategic parameters through which to structure the modern US armed forces, especially in the face of this new multipolar world. In March 2015, during a pre-deployment exercise, Saphir, a French nuclear attack submarine, reportedly penetrated the defense of the USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group and scored simulated torpedo hits on her and some of her escorts too. The Carrier Strike Group included at least a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser, 3 Arleigh-Burke-class destroyers, and a Los Angeles-class nuclear attack submarine. We do not know the engagement rules, and it's difficult for a French 551-pound torpedo warhead to even sink an Arleigh-Burke destroyer. Just imagine what about an immense ship like a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. What we know for sure instead is that in the future, such an attack would inflict a mission kill to the most valuable US asset, making the aircraft carrier unusable for months. In this regard, it is essential to notice that a 30-year-old nuclear attack submarine went undetected even after the first hit. What would happen if it was a much more modern and stealthy air-independent propulsion submarine? Analysts are even more concerned about the hypothesis of swarm attacks of large quantities of relatively inexpensive projectiles such as the Dongfeng 26 Chinese anti-ship ballistic missile. This weapon is a variant of the notorious Dongfeng missile family and stems from the Dongfeng 21D, already branded as the Chinese aircraft carrier killer. Consider that there are more modern missiles of this family with more advanced capabilities. The Dongfeng 26 made breaking news in September 2015 when it appeared in Tiananmen Square during a commemorative parade for the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, with the signs in Latin characters in case the Western observers did not notice it. The Dongfeng 26 can conduct a medium to long-range precision attack on both land and medium to large targets at sea. The weapon has a maximum range of 4,000 kilometers and is undoubtedly a source of anxiety for the United States Navy. Although at least 80 ships of the whole US fleet are equipped with the Aegis anti-missile ship system, and this is deemed as one of the best, the number of incoming missiles, especially if ballistic, that can be addressed is and will always be limited. Moreover, it is much easier and cheaper to increase the number of missiles in a swarm than to build new Aegis-capable ships to defend the carrier strike groups. This very serious issue gets even more complicated against the hypersonic missile threat. The Russian caliber cruise missiles, or even worse, avant-garde hypersonic gliders, force a complete change of the half-a-century-old missile defense paradigm. In the meantime, all those ships, while waiting for new countermeasures, remain vulnerable. The alternative proposed by the critics, submarines. virtually undetectable, safe from cruise missiles attacks and the likes, but they cannot cover the carrier strike group's roles. Not at all. They cannot project power, they are capable of surgical attacks, but they cannot establish a blockade. Nor can they establish a no-fly zone, given US Air Force superiority. They can launch cruise missiles, but they cannot provide support, say, for an amphibious assault operation. They are the immediate best option against the asymmetric capabilities of Russia and China. They can keep sea control, though very far from aircraft carriers' capabilities, but they are useless in many other fields, while being close to useless concerning those day-to-day operations US forces are still involved in. So, the big question emerges again: against which the US forces are going to fight in the future? This will decide near future procurement decisions. It appears aircraft carriers are going to stay for now. It is strongly recommended, though, not to come up with a hasty judgment. US conventional capabilities remain hugely unmatched. Now consider this: is there an aircraft carrier that can be compared to those belonging to the US Navy? The answer is yes, but not really the Nimitz class. They are uncomparable. In fact, in this sense, if you compare the US Navy with the rest of the world, the result is US Navy has 20 aircraft carriers. Just compare US Wasp and America's classes to the other navy's aircraft carriers. They are even better in respect of some of them, if you consider their very good amphibious capabilities. Then, the aircraft carriers have many vulnerabilities against new technologies, as already pointed out, but how long do you think it can pass from the sinking of one of these immense units to the serious threat of nuclear escalation, in the case an enemy power succeeds in this intent? A Nimitz-class carrier carries on board almost 5,000 US soldiers and is considered a top strategic asset. The United States will always do everything to protect them, and any reasonable potential enemy will think twice before trying to sink one of these colossus, sure to expect a retaliation. This video is not very technical, we understand. There are just so many things to say about the most powerful armed forces in the world, and really, you could read about unit stats everywhere. We truly think the occasion is perfect to give you instead some really engaging food for thought by adopting a more comparative approach. So, for example, what do you think is a capability that no one in the world possesses apart from the US Navy, an overlooked one? It is easy to talk about the immense US Nimitz carriers, but one should take a look on what allows these same strike groups to be on the high seas for such a long time. Not every US ship has a nuclear reactor and, for instance, people still need to eat and whatnot. The great asymmetric advantage enjoyed by the American Navy over any potential opponent or ally, the fact of being able to move freely and continuously in every corner of the maritime chessboard, is in fact the result of the often silent work of ships and aircrafts that constantly ensure logistical support at sea by refueling and transporting military equipment. Much more than the bases or other naval installations scattered in the nerve centers of the globe, but by their very nature immobiles and therefore more exposed to the danger of attacks. The presence of a first-class mobile support infrastructure, such as that of the Military Sea Lift Command, guarantees decisive advantages, both in wartime, when naval units exploit the masses of water to remain hidden from the enemy until the moment of attack, and in peacetime, allowing the fleet a constant presence in strategic or higher risk crisis areas, as they are today those in East Asia or the Middle East. This capability is in fact one of the prerequisites for maintaining the control of the maritime communications lines firmly, a goal pursued through the continuous deployment of naval assets, thousands of sea miles away from the American coast, and especially near some of the most important junctions that dot the world's arteries, such as canals, Suez, Panama, and straits, Malacca, Hormuz, Bab al-Mandab. At stake is the protection of American interests, the strengthening of relations with allies, and the fight against possible threats. honestly, we can only spot two weak points. One is the old submarine fleet and the need to seriously invest again in this field in the face of the resurgent Russian Navy and the Chinese Navy growing assertiveness. The other weakness is the hasty withdrawal of the F-14's Tomcat almost a decade ago. Yes, the maintenance was getting expensive, as always happens for old aircrafts, but they should have invested in a substitution, while now they need to design a new unit ex novo. F-14 was a fighter designed to intercept Soviet bombers that could threaten US naval assets. With the Soviet Union collapse, the US echelon probably thought that this capability was not necessary anymore. How naive could it be not to imagine what China was about to become already in the not that far 2006 F-14's withdrawal date? The US Air Force is the largest and most technologically advanced air force in the world. To support and defend America's global interests, the US Air Force focuses on 5 main missions: air and space superiority, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, mobility and lift, global strike, command and control. The US Air Force has been on a constant downward slope since 1952, and this reduction in capacity is expected to continue in the future because of ongoing budgetary pressure. Under budget constraints, the Air Force is maintaining the service and support required for sustaining ongoing operations in Afghanistan, Iraq and Syria, while preparing for traditional contingencies such as state versus state conflicts. The Air Force is seeking to maintain the balance required for full-spectrum operations, from relatively simple operations in uncontested airspace to complex multi-layered operations in anti-access area denial environments. Furthermore, much of the Air Force aircraft is near the end of its expected life cycle, as the average age of its aircraft is over 25 years old. F-15s are still in for most of the air superiority missions, while the F-16s in US Air Force inventory cover the rest. F-22s will substitute F-15s, while F-35s will complement F-22, having an equivalent role of the F-16s. The Air Force has structured its budget to preserve funding for its top acquisition priorities: the F-35's Joint Strike Fighter, the KC-46A Pegasus aerial refueling and strategic military transport aircraft, and the long-range strike bombers lrs-b. These are in fact top priorities if you consider that the aircraft they are about to substitute, F-15s and F-16s and A-10s, the F-35s, KC-135s, the KC-46A Pegasus, and mainly B-52s and B-1s, the lrs-b bombers, are very old and cannot sustain anymore the pressure coming from day-to-day operations. It appears the near future US Air Force will be based on a smaller but more advanced aircraft inventory. It should be noted, however, that the United States will retain a technological advantage, are the only one to have been able to fully develop an advanced 5th generation fighter, F-22, and this is more than enough to retain their dominant position, at least until the Chinese will be able to develop a reliable turbofan engine for their Chengdu J-20. The same applies for Russia and India. In conclusion, the most powerful armed force in the world will maintain its prestigious rank for a few years in the future. What follows will be determined primarily by investments in technology, especially in the case of a potential breakthrough. Not only. For sure, if Americans won't understand the inevitable change in the balance of power, if they continue to ignore the Chinese and Russian request to recognize their role on the international scene, they will finally achieve the result of having two strategic rivals such as Russia and China that, although they do not hate, certainly do not love each other, ending up falling into each other's arms, joining forces in a pragmatic alliance to crush their antagonist. Furthermore, the European allies won't stand by and watch. Things like the threat of starting a tariff war between Europe and the United States will increasingly contribute to cut the rope that holds NATO's countries together. At least, We hope this video will be useful to understand the reasons that move the geopolitical actors on the international scene and the role that a heavyweight one like the United States will continue to play.